Welcome to Breakfast with the Fat Man, another one of my rants relating to the RPG and gaming world that we all are so obsessed with. Right. On the RPG Brigade's channel here a couple weeks back, I noticed things have gotten real slow on the channel the past 2 weeks. A lot of topic and conversation going on in there. I don't know. Seems like to go this way. I'm new to this channel, so does it typically slow down like this every now and then? Because it sure seems like it's gotten awful dusty on there. Anyway, somebody asked what games would be what games are there for would be good to play a complicated political intrigue kind of game in, especially hack and slash. Uh, my answer with that is, well, I don't know. I have yet to see the Game of Thrones RPG version. I've been hearing references to it, but I have not had a chance to read any of it or look at it, so I don't know how its setup is. I know that Dungeons and Dragons and a lot of the sword and sorcery type hack and slash game systems were never originally intended for that sort of depth of play. Not that the mechanics are not there. I mean, if you look at a lot of their skill sets and things like charisma and wisdom, the stats, they kind of, are there. The mechanics are there to play these games. You just need to have players who are capable of doing it. And I'm not going to say that everybody's a dunce or there's super geniuses out there that can take things to a higher level of gameplay. But let's be honest, it's a taste or flavor. If most of the players that come into this stuff expect to be playing hack and slash, they expect to basically have a dungeon crawl or an arena combat scenario where they just go in and murder everything that comes along, i.e., your murder hobo trope or whatever the heck it is you guys like to call it. Okay? But there are still players who come into these game systems and like things with a lot more meat and substance to them. And the more, the better in some cases. So you can actually get games where you go entire sessions or weeks of sessions where nobody draws a blade. Unless it's hiding in a closet under a cloak kind of thing. The traditional cloak and dagger style gameplay. And I like that kind of gameplay. That's a thing for me. A while back, wife and I went to the local game store that what passes for a local game store. We actually have several now. When I was younger, it was just one, and he was devoted to it. These newer ones kind of throw a couple boxes, shelves up here or there in the corners, and then devote some space to it. Mayhem Comics is a pretty decent outfit, but it's way out on the west side, too far for me to just drive to go look at the shelves. Unless I'm out that direction and I got time, I've only been there once or twice the past year. JCD Hobby, on the other hand, on the south side, it's much closer for my wife and I, and benefit for her because this place buys a lot of used stuff. They buy used CDs, and so she's able to get music CDs and stuff fairly cheap. And they buy used game material, and I can get stuff that I don't have on my shelf that I either missed or didn't have the finances to pay for, or at the time wasn't a priority. Well, now where everybody's still rushing around doing the 5.0 version, I'm still collecting my stuff for my 3.5 version. Now, the topic of this whole blog was how to create powerful situations or a cloak and dagger style gameplay and using the hack and slash sets of rules and books. Well, if you got the right kind of source books to do this, it makes your life simpler. And at Greenwood and Eric L. Boyd got together and created one for Faerun called The Power of Faerun. Power of Faerun. Yeah, right. What basically is, and this one would apply in any game system. You just rank out the name of the world. It doesn't work in any world, right? They have gone in and looked at the concept of complicated high level gameplay, and I'm not using that term right. What you would need to be to play in the king's court or in the higher levels of a religious order, or maybe the top levels of your Thieves Guild. There you go. Where you're talking about not being the entry level players, your characters are big movers and shakers, or they're maneuvering around big movers and shakers, and they got to learn how to survive, right? So in this particular source book, they've quantified these things into chapters. Chapter 1, the order in the court. Chapter 2, win the battlefield. Chapter 3, keep the faith. Chapter 4, play the market. Chapter 5, tame the frontier. Chapter 6, king of the road. Chapter 7, high level challenges. Chapter 8, border kingdoms. So now you start to get into stuff that's mostly for Faerun. That's world building there. But the first 6 chapters, good breakdown. So we talk about the order of the court. The one that's the most commonly looked after is playing the king's court. And they're talking about what do rulers and stewards do, stewards and titles, playing the political game, the power behind the throne, making and changing laws, making deals, truce and armistice, keeping the peace, winning favors, earning titles, achieving nobility, ruling a domain, conflicts, sentencing the guilty, political rivals, advisors and ambassadors, revolutionaries, religious leaders, rampaging adventurers, spies and assassins, so on and so forth. Okay, so this is a good source book material to have if you're looking to play a game or run a game where you're going to do a lot of the stuff you see in things like Game of Thrones in the books, where these are important pieces of a very complicated dance. So this dance of swords stuff. So doing that, I mean, it's you got to be dedicated to it. I can tell you, having done it, you have to be dedicated. You have to take notes. You need to keep notes. Ideally, you got to remember that everything's a shade of gray. There are no black and white scenarios here. If you're playing black and white scenarios, it's all or nothing, absolute whatever. Then you're basically back to the hack and slash thing. I'm the king off of this head. That was what Joffrey couldn't get. See, as a king, he was a horrible king, not just because he was a megalomaniac nut job, but because he couldn't understand that you can't dominate through a tantrum or an absolute and expect everybody to dance to your tune. Eventually, it gets you. It gets you. And even the best, the worst of real-world historical leaders. And I've heard the argument already starting out there. Well, what about this guy or what about that guy? Guess what? They didn't start out that way. They started out much suaver, sophisticated. They were manipulators. They rose to power, or once they got ultimate power, they become corrupted by it, and then they turned into the massive dictatorial whatever. So they had to get to that point before they could be the dictator. Can't just start out as a dictator. Dictators who start out as a dictator usually die real fast. They didn't get there very far. There's a lot of maneuvering and politics involved. A lot of you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. A lot of skullduggery and sneaky and spying and so on and so forth in that. So, my own game system, Stellar Frontiers, the core concept behind the game, to some degree, is that sort of mindset. You will start out as a house lord, as a squire, because that's the lowest rank in the game. And you establish your little kingdom, your little space-going empire, with a colony of 10,000 people, a handful of ships, and you start building. Your world builds yourself an empire. In the process, you either have NPCs come in as event roles, or other events, other things that bring these people to you. And some of them are going to be very helpful and useful if you know how to manipulate it. A lot of negotiating comes into play here. And then this is why your intelligence ministry is so important, so crucial, because these are the agents and the 007s and the spies that you're going to task to keep an eye on these so-called allies and sometimes potential political rivals. The game mechanics actually allow for attempts at things like coups and assassination and so on and so forth. And in the process, it can get very convoluted. So my friend and I co-wrote a series of books, and we're in the process of typing book 2 out right now. Book 1's kind of on hold because I know where the stuff's at. It's just buried in my storage locker behind a lot of stuff, and it's not worth the effort of digging it all out at the moment. In the story, though, the Duke Amel and his house Hathion is fairly large by now. It's been in play for 20 years. His first generation of children have reached the age of maturity where they become key players in his Game of Thrones, if you will. And he has rivals. He has several minor nobles. Part of the game mechanics that in order for you to reach Duke level, you have to have 4 minor houses. I think 2 or more. I'm pretty sure it's 4. I'd have to go back and look at my own rules to be for sure. 4 minor houses that answer to you. So these people, are all intents purposes, if they're all NPCs in most cases, although you could have players playing various minor houses and you GM the game if you want that way. The Amel has several. One was a young lady who came from the same core house he did at a later point. We don't know what her motivations for coming was, although at the time, but we went through a number of adventures and situations that tied in with this, with the Lady of Emerald. She establishes her own planet called Emerald under license from the Duke. He says, here's a planet, you go settle it. And so she does. Now, she didn't have the huge colonial effort he did because that's not how that works. She has a lot less to start with and has a longer road to go to get there. But eventually she does, and her colony grows. In order for her to reach Thane, she has to have more than one system under her control. So she establishes a second colony on another planet, another star system, and then eventually a few dozen peripheral planets and moons and stuff to come under her sway. So she gets a territory of she's a banner lord. She's a banner lord of Amel. So, Amel has to keep her motivations and her needs in the back of his head because potentially, legally speaking, in the eyes of the Imperium, this all-powerful galactic force that controls the human what we call settled space, is this big giant bogeyman that you rarely ever see. The game's not about the Imperium; it's about these smaller houses and their struggles and successes. And so he has to keep an eye on her. That means he has to keep spies on her. He has to occasionally run, black ops against her. He has to make sure that whenever she tries to get too ambitious, to cut her off. Now, Arkham can say, I'll just go over and kill her. I'll kill it. I'll just go kill her, cut her head off, and put something out. Okay. Yeah, the game mechanics allow for that, but there's fallout. I have a favorite saying: "Where goes the king, goes the kingdom," and there it goes. So if your king becomes a bloodthirsty megalomaniac, your kingdom's going to follow, and they're all going to start doing it to some degree, and then you're going to have yourself a real nasty mess. And if nothing else, this is where the big Imperium sets in and puts a foot down on your neck, puts a stop to it. That's how that can end that game. One of the many ways that can end your game is getting too overtly crazy, because then the Imperium starts looking, those grander houses above you start looking down and go, do something about that, Fred. Do something about that before they get stupid, before they get to be a big threat to us. Huh? Yeah. So you see, that's the politics inside of politics, the skull and dagger stuff we like so much. And so much opportunities for play there. And having a source book of this nature really ties a lot of that together. I liked this when I first saw it. It took me a minute before I realized just exactly what it was I was looking at. And it goes into other things. So like the section on the faith, and we'll talk about politics and religion. Okay. Now, there was a game system. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it mimicked the Crusades, the Knights Templar. Okay, so you have this huge, massive church, which is a political body, You know, it's not the religion, it's not the faith. And I'm going to get into a diatribe about religion and faith here because I have mixed opinions on it. I'm not a very good Christian, but I'm still Christian. On the other hand, I also know that, and this is where I get into arguments with people who are diehards, the diehard fanatics who are stupid and blind. I'm sorry, misinformed and purposely ignorant of the truth of the realities of the world. Uh, it's politics. I don't care what you call it. You can put it under a white cow and raise a banner and claim that they're following this, that, or the other thing. But at the end of the day, those people are running things. It's all about politics and who's in power and who's got what control and whose little niche are you invading and so on and so forth. So in that aspect, this section in here deals with that. Like I said, there was a game that was similar to the Knight Templars and the Crusades, and it was I've ran. I want to say one for sure. I think two campaigns that were religious, in construction. Everybody in it played a played a character that was tied to the religion of a church in some way, and it's a tough thing to do sometimes, especially for the players who sometimes want to bend the rules or want to get away from the very narrow precepts of what it is to be a paladin or a true priest of a specific order, and to role play within those constraints is a challenge for a lot of players, for a lot of GMs, for me. It's but in and of itself, there is the internal wheels within wheels. So when a particular game I'm thinking of, we had several paladins, and there was two priests, two paladins, and a cavalier. I think they didn't have any sorcerers, they didn't have any wizards, because traditionally speaking, most churches don't have them directly into their control. They have associates and or followers, unless your religion is magic based, which then that would be different. But we just didn't have one. So one of the paladin characters, one of the guys playing the paladins, he just kept veering away from the code of what it means to be a paladin. It's pretty straightforward. It's pretty basic and straightforward. Certain things you got to do as a paladin that you're not supposed to, otherwise, if you don't, you're not a paladin. You're not following the strict path. And so I had to learn to use intrigue and cloak and dagger in a church setting, in a religious setting, to punish this person, to keep redirecting this person back to their past, so to speak. And eventually, we got into some pretty heated arguments over the concept of what they thought. They wanted to play loose and light and loose with the concept, and I thought it should be a lot more serious than what they were wanting. So eventually, we just cut the campaign short and moved on to something different. Which is why they always say politics don't talk politics and religion at the dinner table. There's a good reason for it. It saves a lot of headache and heart. But this has a whole chapter on how to work that, how to work within the hierarchy of how to set up a hierarchy. That's another thing. If you don't have the mechanics, you don't understand how a thief guild really works. How do you establish one? We have enough source material from novels and game books and stuff from various places that if you've done your reading and you at least have a good idea in your head how you vision it, you can make it. You can usually pull it off. But if you don't have a twig's clue, how do you pull one of those off? It can come off real rough and hard. And sort of getting advice from crazy people like that you find on vlogs on the internet. Finding a book like this is very helpful. There you go. So, get a book like this, create your own. Politics and intrigue, awesome stuff.